I was struggling to be brief in my presentation tonight. Usually the town halls I'm doing across town, and I'm really grateful to be with Dennis and Leah tonight, but it's a different format. Usually I've been talking for longer, and I always cover what I think is one of the biggest threats to democracy in Canada right this minute, which is the Canada-China Investment Treaty. And how many of you know about it? Not everybody. I mean, this treaty will bind Canada for the next 31 years if it's ratified. It can be ratified at any time by the Cabinet alone. It will not come to the House of Commons for a vote. It will give the People's Republic of China the right to sue Canada through private closed arbitration hearings, which is basically $3,000 an hour lawyers in a hotel room somewhere who will decide if a Canadian law, municipal, provincial, or federal is allowed to stand, or whether a court case has violated the expectations of profit of a state-owned enterprise of the People's Republic of China. This was offensive and corrosive to democracy as a concept when it first came up in Chapter 11 of NAFTA. I've always opposed these. The Greens call for a 6-month notice to get out of NAFTA, but that's beside the point. Right now, the Canada-China Investment Treaty, the thing that's standing between ratification and the treaty, is a small First Nation on Vancouver Island. The Hupakasset First Nation went to court, lost its first round of hearings. If any of you are on the Lead Now mailing list, you've had appeals for funds to help them. The government of this country, the Justice Department under Stephen Harper, demanded court costs from this nation of 300 people who are standing up for all of us. And there's a cost award of $100,000 against the First Nation for its case, which was this, very simply, nobody consulted us about the impact on our territory and our natural resources of giving the People's Republic of China these kinds of abilities to sue for arbitration damages. And I agree with you on the point of people not understanding our system. It was clear to me when Stephen Harper prorogued the House and told Canadians that the effort to have a coalition government, in his words, was an attempt to overturn the results of the election. That was an outrageous statement because our electoral system elects in 2008 308 members of parliament. And nobody in the coalition was attempting to remove any of those individual members of parliament. We were simply attempting to use the parliamentary system we have to say the Conservatives and Stephen Harper has lost the confidence of the House. Let some other MPs from other parties try to put this together. So if we understand our system, we can help fight for it. And if we want to protect Canadian sovereignty and our ability to bring back the Fisheries Act, the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act, the Navajo Waters Protection Act, and the laws that have been changed, we need to ensure that the Canada-China Investment Treaty is never ratified. So please donate to help the Hupakasset First Nation with their court case.
Hi there. A couple of weeks ago, I was actually part of a group that organized an event that brought 2 independent members of parliament, your colleagues, to Winnipeg. I believe my organizer is behind me, so hopefully I'm not stealing his question. But the question I have is mainly geared towards Elizabeth, so I'd love to hear from the other panelists as well as for their stance on the issue. But it's my opinion that dismantling the PMO that you kind of spoke to is not actually the biggest hindrance to the independence of MPs and their ability to speak freely. And so I'd have to disagree with you on that, but I'd like you to consider, at least in this option, but the main impediment to democracy that I see in today's electoral politics is the role of the leader. So why not empower the members of parliament after the election is done to select who their leader is? And at any point in time, if they're not happy with the leadership under that, then they can, by all means, kick their bums out. And that's in my mind, is a system outside of the PMO, because I think that, the OLO or the PMO, they have a role to play. And I mean, definitely to coordinate 160 MPs if you're in majority, it's like, I don't know, it's a goddamn zoo. But returning the power to the MPs and the people that elect them in terms of dictating the electoral and the policy direction of government, I think is the best way to go. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, first of all, I agree that it is a key part of the problem is that leaders of political parties have too much power. That's why I have a private member's bill to remove what was essentially an accident of history. in the up until the late 1960s, the ballots in Canada did not include the names of the political parties. It was just the names of the candidates. And they decided, as our population grew, they amended the Elections Act and said, okay, we're going to add the political party name next to the name of the candidate because people don't all know each other anymore, kind of. And then how do we know this person really represents the party they say they do? We'll require on their nomination papers that the leader of the party signs their nomination papers. The law of unintended consequences kicks in, and what had happened with that was, for the first time, a leader of the party had the ability to bully and threaten their members of parliament, their candidates, to say, if you don't do what I want, I won't sign your nomination papers, or I'll withdraw my signature from your papers in the middle of the campaign. So we have to reduce the powers of leaders, and it is the case, as you're hinting there, that in every other Commonwealth democracy, Commonwealth nation, with Westminster parliamentary democracy, the caucus, the elected caucus of MPs, can remove the leader. You'll remember when I mentioned it that Margaret Thatcher didn't lose in an election. John Major and her Conservative colleagues got rid of her. In Australia recently, it was sort of a revolving door, went Kevin Rudd to Julia Gillard, back to Kevin Rudd, and unfortunately then Labour lost. But the reality of it is that because Canada has sort of aped some of the US electoral process, so the idea of the political party convention, that only the members of the convention can elect the leader. I agree with you, it's a problem. And we can amend that by getting rid of the leader's signature on the nomination forms, and perhaps if we don't say that, I love the idea that MPs can pick who the parliament, who their leader is going to be in the floor of comments. They could pick much better people. It's hard to imagine anyone worse. But the reality of the system is we'd improve it if we even said that the caucus could trigger a leadership review back to convention. Let me just emphasize for you, though, why the powers of PMO are so dangerous. We have $10 million being spent, completely unaccounted, completely non-transparent. I can't even, as a member of parliament, find out how many people are employed or what they do. And that office is making a mockery of even what cabinet members do. I just quote briefly from an article that was in the Globe and Mail by former Senator Lowell Murray, who's a very fine person. And what he pointed out was happening under Stephen Harper was that on top of the existing centralized PMO, we now have a, quote, a tightly run communications regime within which message control is the very essence of governance. Under this system, even strong ministers often become passengers on their own departmental ships, their destination and course set by remote control from Message Central, capital M, capital C, at PCO, PMO. Parliament is not even in the picture. The powers of the Prime Minister's office and the amount of money being spent there is a serious problem, no matter how a Prime Minister arrives in that office.
Just a quick response, Zach. I think that what's happening in Parliament, and I admire Elizabeth for making those efforts, and there are parliamentarians that are trying to reform the system. I think, though, that until the Canadian public is engaged seriously and fully, and not just at the ballot box, but fully, we'll not really have that kind of change. Just as one technique, I would love to see, and I think it should have happened after the last election, when the Liberals, the Green, and the NDP left maybe one or two members of Parliament in Ottawa to monitor this shenanigan, these games that are being played, and the rest of the MPs come out to the constituencies and be that educational voice, be part of the community, listen to the community, and interpret what was happening. If that 55% or 45% of the parliamentarians came back to the constituencies, I think that would be far more democratic than try to tinker with the system. I mean, I know that the system has to change, but I think the Canadian public has to get much more engaged.
First off, I want to thank